Hey, 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 hello. Happy Thursday, January 27th. My name is Vonda Page, and I am so happy to be here talking with you today. This is the information session for the Radical Alliance of Women and Fems. And this talk specifically, and hopefully, if a few people get a chance to get on live, will help to answer some questions and give you some background and insight about me and about this amazing initiative that we're so excited to kick off. And so, before I really get into talking in a lot of detail about the program, what I really wanted to do was really start the conversation by talking about healing. And when you're thinking about relationships, whether you're talking about relationships at work, relationships in your personal life, or relationships with new people, um healing is a big part of it. And so what I really want to do is start the discussion by talking about beginnings, and specifically new beginnings. So anybody who knows me, they know that I like new beginnings. I like the first day of the week, and to me the first day of the week could be Saturday, Sunday, or Monday. I like the first day of the month, of the year. I like, just new beginnings. And I think part of that is because I'm a planner. And so, as a planner, I think about how I develop those habits about planning and why planning is important to me. And because of the way that I grew up, because of my childhood, planning was really important to me because it really took a lot for me to try to keep myself safe. So I grew up in a home that had a lot of abuse, a lot of gaslighting and trauma. And so I would do anything to keep from going home at night. Sometimes I would stay out late in neighborhoods that weren't as great. And so I used to have to every now and then, run out of a dangerous situation, which I definitely wouldn't advise for people to put themselves in those situations if they can help it. But I also grew up with a lot of love, a lot of pride, a lot of joy, and a lot of faith. And it really hasn't been, I think, up until the last few months or weeks, even so, that I'm realizing the significance of faith and the impact of faith in my life, even though I don't consider myself, a practicing Christian or a practicing Baptist, but I know that faith was important to me. And so, when I think about who I am and I think about how I developed, into the person I am today, right? I don't let myself be defined by labels, but I grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, lived in Delaware for about 15 years, and I've been in the Pacific Northwest now for about 8 years. And throughout that time, throughout my life, I spent about 32 years or so in corporate America. I went to college. I have 2 degrees in communications. And when I think about my life and all the jobs that I've had, they've always been around training. They've always been around technology. They've always been around people and teams and bringing people and teams together. So that's really a big part of who I am. But that's, what we might call the professional side, right? That's not really defines who we are, as people, but it's part of who we are. It's our experience. And I think that it's our experience, right? That especially those of us who live in American society or who work in corporate America, our experience is what we think brings us value and worth, or that's what we're told, right, is our value and worth. However, what we have to recognize is that's not all of who we are, right? And that's not everything that gives us, our value and our worth. And so when you think about, who you are and who you want to be, I think about the type of person that I am. But the thing is how do I really want to be? And so if I think about my experience out in the work world, in corporate America tells you you are worth a certain amount based on your education, based on your criteria of credentials, and they pay you a certain amount. They give you a certain title and they tell you this is who you are to us. This is who we've defined you as. These are your boundaries and this is who you are. And so when I think about being in that environment for such a long time, for over 30 years, I think what I'm learning or what I've learned recently is that conditioning that I received from being in that environment for such a long time, that conditioning has really permeated who I am, whether I'm inside of those environments or I'm outside of those environments. And that's something that I've learned recently. And so, what that learning, and when I think about it from, my standpoint, right, what that learning does is it really puts me in a place where I am always striving to advance, where I'm always trying to grow. And so when I think about, right, learning intentional and unintentional lessons, right, how do these things occur? And I think about loving to learn and being focused in on these intentional lessons because they help me advance, right? So for example, Saturdays, Mondays, and Thursdays, those are my days I feel like are my learning days, right? Saturdays I do talk shows. Saturdays I listen to podcasts. Saturdays I usually start a new book or finish any open books that I didn't finish throughout the week. Mondays, I start a new a book usually, or pick a new focus area that I'm going to concentrate on. So back to how I started the conversation and said, that I'm learning and what am I learning and talking about healing. And that first thing that I'm learning is that I myself, right, I have patterns of trauma that are directly related to how my other experiences were. That's number one. Number two, whether I'm in a new environment or an environment that is similar to the one in which I've been before, I'm still bringing myself with me and I'm still bringing my trauma with me. That's number two. The third thing is that I realized that I've been conditioned, right, to uphold my behavior, right, as a matter of safety and security and well being. And so, regardless of the type of experiences that I have, right, I'm always going to be entering those experiences with my own experience. And so the key, right, is to know and recognize that how I take care of myself is important. So what I've learned, and it really just really hit, very, very hard and significant, over the last 2 weeks is what I do. My pattern is that I prioritize the comfort and care over other people over that of myself. Think about that for a second. I prioritize the comfort and care of other people over the comfort and care of myself. Why? Well, if I've been conditioned and I'm working in, right, colonized spaces where I'm not really given the opportunity to have, the free expression or free thought. I'm used to my ideas getting shut down. I'm used to asking permission for everything. I'm used to be given a template. I'm used to consistently being, told no, regardless of, what my contributions are. And so, because of all of that, right, my own conditioning, right, um, allows me or, disallows me from sometimes even standing up for myself, even when I'm not in the same situation as, a corporate situation. Um, and so with that, the thing I thought about is how and what does it look like for a person to intervene for themselves, right? When they are in a situation where they're not used to being able to do it. And they have so much scar tissue, right? So much trauma that has been either, partially unresolved or gets triggered by other things. It really has an impact. And so I think about some of you may know back in September, I had a really bad cut on my foot. And the cut even though the cut is healed, of course, the scar is there. And because the cut was so deep and it tore capillaries and it actually took, some of my foot out, right? I have like a dent and like a space even with that scar. And so, even though it doesn't hurt now, even though it's not as bad, there's still some healing that has to happen, right? And so, scars, they remained, right? And they still can have an impact. So first and foremost, right, is that healing takes time. So it's going to take time regardless of what type of experience you have had, right? It is going to take time. And that time that it takes can go by relatively slow, or it may feel that it can go by quicker. And the thing that helps healing, right, and that process of healing, right? And we know time is also a process. The other thing that it takes is community. So, one of the things I recognize is that, community means people who care about us, right? People who are in relationship with us, right? People who care about our experiences, right? And the things that we go through. And so when we are in the process of dealing with trauma, when we are in the process of, going through healing, right? It's important to know that there is community and that we have somebody out there that cares, right? But thirdly, right, even though you may be going through something traumatic, even though you may be experiencing something that is painful or harmful, you might not feel like, even if you have people who have gone through it with you before, you might not feel like, oh, I can go to these people and talk to them. You know why? Because the third thing is that healing takes courage. So healing takes time, right? Because it's a process. It takes community, right? Because we cannot do all these things in isolation, whether your community is friends, whether your community is a therapist, whether your community is, people in your inner circle. Maybe it's, your work partner or whomever, right? But it takes community. But what does it take to bring a concern to your community, right? What does it take to actually go to your community and say, hey, I'm hurting. Hey, I'm experiencing something traumatic. Hey, I'm going through some stuff. Well, that takes courage. And courage is hard, right? Because all of the things that we experience and the messages and the way things are run, right, really are antithetical to us having courage, right? If you think about systems, whether you're talking about, meritocracies, in corporate workplaces, or if you're talking about the legal or criminal justice system, or whatever you are talking about, right? There is structures and things that set up that are designed to make you face barriers, right? But the more courage you have, there is a greater likelihood of you trying to overcome those barriers in a different way, right? And so the way that I think about it is, like I said, healing takes time, right? Because it's a process, it takes community and it takes courage. And so on my part, right, when I think about being in a situation and in a relationship and in a community, right, where I knew I had people in that community that would have heard me. I know I have people in that community that would have listened. But because of my conditioning, right? Because of how my years of similar experiences and the patterns have been replicated. And because of my experience dealing with those patterns, right? It was very difficult to muster the courage, right? But as you think about any person, right, who is, let's say, the victim of a violent crime, or the victim of something, right? There's a whole bunch of steps that you have to go through. So, in addition to the step of actually living through the trauma, right, as it's happening, right, then you also have these other steps, right, of doing your regular everyday stuff in life while you're living through that trauma. And if you're doing that in a female body that is Black and that is in a 90, percent, 99, 95, 98% white environment, right? It makes it even more difficult. But the thing is, right, that people fail to realize is that whether you're talking about workplace trauma, whether you're talking about racialized trauma, whether you're talking about, a combat veteran coming home, and getting reacclimated to everything, you're still talking about the healing process. And that healing process takes time, it takes community, and it takes courage. And so, community is the thing that I want to talk about when I'm talking about a radical alliance of women and femmes, right? So, if we think about like community and you think about, okay, what is a community? A community is a group of people that really are coming together, whether it's geographically because they just are there organically, or because they want to, and because they want to do something together. And so the way I think about the Radical Alliance of Women and Femmes, and the way I think about this entire way that healing happens within community and with courage and over time, right, is that not only, is it a process, but it is super important that that community be an intersectional community. It's important that that community be omnidiverse. So I'm talking about age, right? I think age is probably, I would have to say 18 and up for this, because I'm gonna not lie, I do use profanity and other people do. And so maybe, if a person is under 18, they might not be a good fit. But I think the age is literally 18 and up. I think socioeconomically, I think you're talking, whether you're talking a student or a CEO. I think if you are talking academically, you could be talking, any field professionally. You could talk specifically about socioeconomic. It doesn't matter, right? Because this community, right? And the reason I'm calling it a radical alliance, right? It's radical because we're going back to the root of community and the root of what an alliance is, right? And so bringing people together, right, that have common goals. Now, we may be going about those goals in different ways and we're coming from different perspectives, but is the goal to really build community? Is the goal to really say, you know what, I need to come out of this box that I am, wherever this box is. I need to come out of this box and I need to do something different. I need to examine, right, myself, and look at what kind of values do I have. How do I want to show up in the world, right? So, before 4 o'clock, I was given a little, background and talking about, some things around, who I am, right? The fact that I'm 52, that I grew up in Philadelphia, that I lived in Delaware for, a decade and a half, and now I've been a Pacific Northwesterner for the last 8 years, right? That I worked 32 years in corporate America, and part of that experience was very traumatic, right? In terms of the racialized trauma that I experienced. But that's not all of my experience, right? And that's not all of who I am, but it is part of who I am. And so those experiences, right, that I have, those experiences that I bring to the table are those experiences that I bring to any community in which I'm a part. So when we're talking about an intersectional community, when we're talking about a radical alliance, when we are talking about an omnidiverse community of women and non-binary people, right? People who understand and have, thought about, or maybe even have gotten in touch with their divinity and that divine feminine. Because part of the community, right? And part of what we know is necessary and what we need to impart more of in the world is more of that feminine nature, right? More of that nurturing, more of that compassion, right? Less aggression. But we also know that there is a deep, complicated complex, significant relationship, right, between women and specifically Black and white women and other non-Black women and people when it comes to this whole equity thing, right? When it comes to having all these conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, when we're talking about, you know, anti-racism or any of that work, we know that it's going to take a community. And we know also, especially the more honest we can be with ourselves, is that that work starts within. So it has to start with you being able to look at yourself and say, okay, where are my cuts, right? Where are they? And then if a cut gets aggravated or a cut gets irritated, how does that show up for me? So I'll go back to using myself as an example because I am my own best example. I have a lot of racialized trauma from working in corporate spaces. In those corporate spaces, my direct supervisor has always been a white male or a white woman. I had one or two opportunities to work for Black women, and those experiences were pretty darn horrific. But it's not really about the skin color. And the thing that I've learned about relationships, the thing that I've learned about people, the things I've learned about cultivating connections, and the thing that I've learned about community is that it doesn't have to do with this racialized construct that we're all forced to live under. The thing that really connects us, the thing that crosses those divides, the thing that really takes us to a different place is really around culture and common goals, right? And so, common goals from the standpoint of lining up your goals with your values. So, for me, what is important to me and the type of person that I want to be? Well, first, I am a kind person. And I think the reason I'm a kind person is because I was met with a lot of cruelty as a young child from people who I thought should have been much kinder, right? And so I believe that kindness is important. But I also believe that candidacy and being candid is important. And so for me, being candid means being direct. Now, there are a lot of differences, and this is something that I have learned over the past few months, and especially, working on Opposites Oppress, the podcast with my partner, Alyssa Stamp, is that there is a lot of difference in the way white women and Black women and other non-Black women specifically communicate. So, for example, whether you're talking about tone of voice, going up and down in terms of how you're ending a sentence and that whole thing, or whether you're talking about the use of certain words, like we had a great discussion around the word backpedaling versus another word, and how I use the word versus the way she uses the word. So, one of the things is that we are coming to the table, to the community, to the environment, to the workspace, to the team, to the group, to the book club, whatever, with all of our baggage, right? And if 25% of all human beings, or all Americans, I think the statistic is, have been abused, right? Then that means that one out of every four people has some trauma that maybe is resolved or unresolved, right? Depending on how many of us women, especially, have worked in public workspaces or corporate America, and depending on how old you are, you may have years of assault or workplace trauma brought on by, sexual harassment or other things, right? I mean, me personally, I've been groped at work. I've been, pushed. I've been shoved. I've been insulted. I've had people ask me the most degrading personal questions, and so all of those things, right? And when you experience them repeatedly, those are those things that, tend to cause more triggers and more issues and problems later on in life. But when we come together, when we get in community, right, with other people who know, hey, yeah, I have some work I need to do on myself. I've had some trauma, or I've had some, terrible things happen to me, or I have some confusion about this, or I have questions, whatever it is, right? When you're in community and you're not alone, it makes it better. And the other thing is, right, with it, is that in community, you can be more courageous. And so, you will not hear me going forward, at least not in anything you hear me say in 2022 and going forward, talking about safe spaces. Because I don't believe in safe spaces, because you know what? I'm a Black woman living in America, and I can't tell you any space that I've ever been safe. Not 100%, right? I can't get the type of healthcare that I need, regardless of what kind of insurance that I have. I can't, board an airplane without, some kind of issue, regardless of if I have a first class seat. I can't, tell a person that I think is a colleague, hey, I don't want to be in your little group anymore because it really doesn't align with my values, without being, attacked, harassed, stalked, and basically attacked, right? Because I'm standing up for myself. And so I don't believe that there are any safe spaces for Black women, really. Um, and I don't think there's too many safe spaces for women in general. No, there's hardly no safe spaces in America for Black trans women, that's for sure, right? And other people, right, who do not have the privilege, y'all, of walking around in a white body, because that is a privilege. Trust me. And if you don't understand that it's a privilege, then you're a perfect person, right, to take part in the Radical Alliance of Women and Fems, because that's the kind of stuff that we're going to talk about. That's the kind of stuff that we're going to address. And we're going to talk about, things that are hurtful and things that are painful. So back to the safe spaces conversation, right? I believe in courageous spaces, right? And so a courageous space looks like this. Somebody makes a mistake, whatever that mistake is, right? That mistake could be, maybe it's making a racist comment. Maybe that mistake is doing something harmful, like showing a image, right? That is a trigger warning because, it is a image of, let's say, from, enslaved Africans from the 17th century or something, right? The courageous approach, right, is, so first, when you get called out or somebody says, hey, this thing is problematic and this is why. So if you're a Black person and you see an image, especially a Black American person sees an image, right, of, let's say, um, the insurrection from January 6th. Me personally, the insurrection was such a slap in the face, and it was so hurtful. Not hurtful that the people did it, because, I give it to the red state people, because the red state people, they fight for their convictions and they go hard on what they believe. So I give it to the red state people for trying to do their thing. But January 6th was a slap in the face to me, and I'm sure millions and millions and millions of Black people in America, because yeah, we have ancestors and grandparents and cousins and brothers and sisters and people who are fighting and who wear that uniform just like white people do. But the fact that way our government responded basically told Black people where we stood. And so everything about January 6th is negative for me, not just but that, right? And so by me saying that and saying, I don't want to see any images of it, I don't want to talk about it, let's not deal with it. And then a person not being able to take that correction and say, okay, I hear your point. And even though I might not feel the same way, I respect you enough to listen. And so going forward, I'm not going to do these type of things. Or going forward, I'm going to ask for your input to just make sure that I'm not doing anything harmful, especially since I'm not from your community. So that would be an example of a white woman having a conversation with me that would have been a courageous conversation. And that type of conversation would really help to drive, um, you know, progress, right? Because there's no journey that is going to be perfect. And I think about when my daughter was in school, one of her teachers, they had like a thing in a chart in the class, and it talked about practice making progress. And I love that they didn't say practice makes perfect, because I don't believe in perfection. And I know a lot of us, especially those of us who've grown up in American culture, we have this perfectionist tendency. I know a lot of us who grow up Black, who grow up brown, who grow up Latin, who grow up indigenous, if we do have, those opportunities to go to college and things like that, we have all this pressure a lot of times on us to be perfect and be great and be this, right? Instead of just be. And all of that, right, is fine. But, right, if you're not from that community, you don't necessarily know what's going to be painful for somebody in that community. But the way, right, to step up, right, the way to really be a leader, the way to really say, hey, I know I'm working on myself. If you would be able to take that courage and not look at it as a bad thing. Now, I'll give another example for me. So I am not a member of the LGBTQ community, although I'm an ally for everybody. I fight for everyone. I believe human beings is human beings. And so I would go hard for a queer person, a member of the queer community, just like I would for a Black person. Because I'm also 52, I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up, even though, my family voted Democrat, I still grew up around a lot of very conservative values. And I grew up around a lot of, in the 70s, especially, racist, homophobic terms. And so I know that I have terms from back in the 70s and 80s that are terms and words we would not say now. But I get it and I understand those terms. But if somebody in the queer community came to me and said, hey, hold up, hard stop, you cannot say that word, I would be like, okay, I'm sorry. What's the better way to say it? Boom, boom, boom. I would be like, okay, so, and then I would continue to use it as an example, right? So, oh, and here's my example. I just remembered the actual example that I know is a potential pitfall for me. When I grew up in the 70s and 80s, we would use the word lame, 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 as like in the early 80s. I think we were saying it in the 80s, actually. I think we started saying it in middle school. But we would say lame as like corny, or like not really that great, but like not bad, but it's just like meh, right? And I remember using that word in a meeting that I had, and I was like, oh my goodness, I shouldn't say that word. But that word is still in my vocabulary. Now, if I catch myself and say it, I'll catch myself before I say it. I'll say, and I'll try to catch it before it comes out. But if somebody were correcting me on it, I would be like, thank you for calling me on that. Because I know, because of my age, I know that because of how I grew up, I know I have a lot of terms and words and things that are not acceptable in today's way, right? And so because of disability inclusion, right, because of all this new stuff we know about neurodiversity and all of these things, we, those of us who want to be conscious, those of us who want to be, good stewards of humanity and caretakers of our fellow beings, know we shouldn't use certain words, right, and certain things, but also know that everything is a learning. So back to what I said in the beginning about, for me, right, I'm a learner. And what do I care about? I care about learning, and learning is like super important. So as I learn new information, I apply new information, and I expect, and I hold myself to this, but I expect people around me to hold me accountable for that too. So in the Radical Alliance of Women and Fems, we are going to be in a courageous space where we are holding somebody accountable and holding all of each other accountable. And so that's the number one thing. So, okay. So in addition to, it being a space where it is courageous, right? The difference between a courageous and a safe space is, in corporate America, especially, and when I worked in corporate America, I remember going to meetings like this where they're talking about, okay, well, we need to have a safe space. And so in a safe space, what that means is you cannot hurt a white person's feelings. Safe space equals you cannot hurt a white person's feelings. And that's okay, right? But that's not how it works, right? Because feelings are something that we all have, and feelings are something that can be processed. And so rather than avoid negative feelings. Rather than avoid hard feelings, we're going to talk about hard feelings, right? And we're going to process through those things. And we're going to do that in a way that is loving and nurturing and holding space for each other in a beautiful way, right? And so, with that being said, it's going to be a space of growth. It's going to be a space of expansion. It's going to be a space of nurturing. But it's also going to be a space that's going to ask you to, really look at who you are, right? And really be able to ask yourself some hard questions. We're going to do things that we do all together in a group. We're going to watch video. We're going to have practical things that we can try on our own. We'll break off into small groups. We'll break off into some groups that it may be, this is going to be the group where, people who are Black are having this part of the conversation. People who are white might be having another part of the conversation. And then we come back to the table. But the bottom line is that it is going to be a place where we get to, align who we are, right? We get to adapt to, new skills, new people, new ideas, right? And we really get to accelerate who we are in terms of relationship and community. And so, okay, how is it going to work? First and foremost, you can go to www.cfiba.com and then slash alliance or intercultural alliances to learn more. You can go in this chat here and click on the link. But basically, we're getting started on next week on Wednesday with a kickoff party. The kickoff party is free, and then we will start the full on first cohort of the Alliance on February 9th. And the cost is $14.97, is 8 straight weeks. But it is not cost prohibitive. So, if you want to join, but you're struggling, or you want to join and you're not sure, about the money piece, don't worry about that. Just hit me up at contact@cfiba.com and just type in, what you want to talk about. But also, fill out this form, and this form will give you, options to type in any information or questions. And so, with that, I don't see any questions in the chat. Thanks for those of you who had a chance, Beverly and others who jumped on Latrice live. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. If you have my email, feel free to hit me at hello@radicalchangellc.com. But I mean, basically, this is going to be a space where we're going to take the time to examine who we are, our experiences, how we interact with each other. We're going to really get to explore, what does it feel like to be in a space where you can actually be, and you can actually ask questions, and you can actually be heard, and you can actually grow, right? And be nurtured at the same time, right? But at the same time, you will get called out on your bullshit if there's something there. I expect people to call me out on mine. I think me personally, I fortunately have also had jobs that had health insurance. And so I've been able to go to therapy for years and years and years and years and years. And so I have a very unique and interesting perspective in a way that I look at myself and examine myself, and I know what my bullshit is. Like, I know, why I'm not in a relationship with a man as an example, right? I know what my stuff is, and that's fine. I'm working on it, but I also know that that I want to help create an environment and build an environment and build ecosystems where women and femmes can come together, where we can talk, where we can share, where we can laugh, where we can cry, where we can learn, where we can experience the full gamut of emotions, where we can experience the full gamut of what it's like to be who we are in comfort, in safety, and all of that, right? Comfort, physical comfort, of course, right? Because there's going to be some discomfort. Because anytime you're talking about looking at yourself and examining, your own motivations and intentions and beliefs and all of that, right, is going to bring some things into question that you might not like. and that's okay. We're gonna be doing it together, right? And so with that, unless anybody has questions in the chat, I'm going to pop some links in the chat. I'm going to pop this link out for people who were in the first cohort, people who signed up or came to any of the information sessions, and you can check it out. And like I said, if you have any questions, you can hit me up. Alyssa's going to be out on PTO or OOO for a little bit, because she's doing some healing for herself. Because we really experienced a big traumatic thing together. But the other thing is everybody manages and handles trauma differently, and everybody has different ways that they recover and heal, and the way they do that, and that is totally fine. But we are, on this ride together. We are in this thing, and we are looking forward to whoever wants to take our hands virtually, and after we wash them, since we're still in COVID, in person, but and let's go and do the thing. So we hope you join us. Once again, it's the Radical Alliance of Women in Fems, and it is a omnidiverse, intersectional group of people who are open, willing, and courageous enough to look at the divine feminine and really say, how do we tap into that so that we can cultivate better relationships within ourselves, within each other, to all drive and cultivate a better community, right? One where everybody has a place, one where everybody is welcome, one where we are not organizing each other by race or by gender, but where we can just be as people, and we can get that enjoyment and get that fulfillment and get that real community build and growth together. So with that, thank you, and I will see you soon.